Tomorrow, she's briefing 35 staff of members of the House Foreign Affairs and Foreign Ops State Approach Subcommittee. And there are a lot of links out there and Zoom, so apologize for the confusion and the delay. But why don't we get started since we're a few minutes in and we now have 30 people on the call. So welcome, thank you all for being here. My name is Mike Manitos, president of Manitos & Manitos. And in our family's, well, our firm's 30 plus years of working in Washington on Hellenic and Orthodox issues and working with the Greek government, we're excited to have with us one of Greece's best representatives that we've seen, representing Greece at a crucial time for US-Greece relations in the Eastern Mediterranean. So let me give a brief introduction of the ambassador, and then I'll turn it over to her for remarks, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So Alexandra Papadopoulou, on February 6th this year, received her credentials from the President of the United States, unfortunately, right before all fell apart with COVID. So we're nice to be able to have this opportunity to introduce you to her. She became, made history for Greece as the first female ambassador to the US in Greece's history. She's very familiar with the United States. She received her master's degree in international relations and international law from UPenn. She married a Greek American, a prominent member of our community, has a son who lives in California. Her first posting outside of Greece was as consul of Greece in New Orleans, Louisiana from 87 to 91. And she also served in New York City for 5 years as Deputy Permanent Representative of Greece to the UN from 2002 2007. She began her service in Greece's foreign ministry 40 years ago next year. Over her distinguished career, she's represented Greece in Amman, Jordan, Toronto, Canada, Pristina, Kosovo, Skopje, and as ambassador in Uruguay and Paraguay. She also served as representative of Greece to the EU and to the UN. And when Kyriakos Mitsotakis was elected Prime Minister of Greece in July of last year, he brought Ambassador Papadopoulou with him to appoint her as his head of his diplomatic cabinet. As important of an advisor to him as she is, he had to let her go to send her over to one of the most important postings for Greece outside of the United States here in Washington, D.C. And as many of you know on this call know, that we have many good ambassadors of different countries in Washington, but surprisingly, not all that many of them have a direct relationship with the Prime Minister of their country. And that is certainly the case with Greece. And so we're very excited at this crucial time for US-Greece relations and important developments in the Eastern Mediterranean that we have such a close advisor, the Prime Minister of Greece, and our speaker today, the Ambassador of Greece to the United States, Alexandra Papadopoulou. Madam Ambassador.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to all of you who are present today. I appreciate your time and your interest in issues of Eastern Mediterranean that are of crucial importance to my country, of course, and I dare to say of crucial importance to the US, NATO, and the entire Western world as we define it. I will start with the sequence of events, just to give you a very brief outline of what happened this past month and a half, late July, August, until mid-September, when we had a major crisis in Eastern Mediterranean between Greece and Turkey. Most of you have read a lot of things in the newspapers, including American newspapers, because the situation was really very tense, and the two countries we came to the brink of war. The problem started in the last crisis started in late July when Turkey sent a seismic research ship vessel or race for exploration, seismic exploration in maritime zones, continental shelf, which falls under the jurisdiction of Greece and Cyprus. So Turkey has a different opinion about the jurisdiction over this part of Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean continental shelf and maritime zones. Based on their interpretation of who has jurisdiction over what, they sent the seismic research vessel. I understand that there are a lot of cases in this world where different countries, neighboring countries, have different views about jurisdiction and about sovereign rights. But in my country's belief and policies, when there is a dispute, then the two countries involved sit together, they discuss, they try to find a common solution, and if they cannot reach an agreement, they refer the issue to the International Court. In my country's policies, threat of use of force or use of force is not an acceptable means of solving issues. And in the meanwhile, while there is a pending dispute, neither country takes measures or that escalate tensions, and everybody refrains from creating fait accompli or creating conditions that are not conducive to fruitful and in good faith negotiations. Unfortunately, Turkey didn't do this. They sent Oruç Reis, the research vessel, accompanied by around 35 naval war vessels of the Turkish Navy. So you understand, in areas that are not very big, like Eastern Mediterranean, Southern Aegean Sea, this creates not only the risk of conflict, but also a high risk of an accident. And an already volatile situation can turn to become a very dangerous situation. Due to a lot of efforts on the part of the European Union and of course the United States, the war was averted, and in the end Turkey took the vessel Oruç Reis and its navy back to its ports, because this was what Greece was saying all along. We're ready to negotiate, but not under the threat of use of force. No negotiations can be in good faith and can be fruitful if the one is forced to negotiate with a weapon at his head. So here we are today. In the meanwhile, we're ready to sit down for negotiations. In the meanwhile, last week, we had a European Council which dealt with the issue of Turkey, and it was basically devoted to the issue of Turkey in a much bigger form, more comprehensive form than this last Greek-Turkish crisis. Unfortunately, I have to say that in the last years, we see the gradual evolution of Turkey from a reliable NATO ally with democratic values, rule of law, human rights, to a country that is anything but a reliable NATO ally. The destabilizing presence and policies of the Turkish leadership in the greater Middle East area, Eastern Mediterranean Middle East area, are well known and documented, and I don't want to repeat them. This destabilizing influence goes to Syria, Libya, Sub-Saharan Africa, Somalia, and now, of course, Cyprus and Greece, and now to Caucasus, Southern Caucasus, getting directly involved in the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And you know, the emergence of this new Turkey that sees itself as the leader of the Sunni Islamic world, and in the image of Iran being the leader of the Shiite Islamic world, and this new Turkey that uses political Islam as a weapon to push forward foreign policy objectives that are reminiscent of the Ottoman Empire spheres of influence, is by itself a destabilizing factor. And in this highly volatile region like the Middle East, Eastern Mediterranean, it adds more trouble than already exists. we see, as I said, these destabilizing policies and how they affect areas like Libya, Syria, all the way to Iraq. And this has created a new map in the Middle East. And we see the realignment of forces in the Middle East. Of course, there are many factors for this realignment of forces, but one of the main factors is the destabilization policies of the Turkish leadership. The European Council didn't, of course, discuss Turkey and its role. We have to remember that Turkey is a candidate country for membership to the European Union. In the major destabilizing role of Turkey, but of course it focused the conclusions on the immediate causes of concern of two European Union member states, which is Greece and Cyprus. The European Council conclusions are important because they projected unity, decisiveness, and solidarity on the part of the EU member states, and they showed that they manifested a very keen strategic interest in security and stability in Eastern Mediterranean. In the conclusions, all measures provided by the EU treaties are left on the table, which of course includes sanctions, and but the leaders decided to give diplomacy one more chance and leave these measures on the table until and wait for Turkey to show that they respect the rules of the EU when handling when pushing for what they consider their interests. So Greece and Turkey are supposed to sit on the table for exploratory talks on the delimitation of maritime zones, and there is a strict conditionality of a positive EU agenda towards Turkey, conditionality based on how Turkey conducts itself in these talks and discussions with Greece, meaning that Turkey should go to these negotiations in good faith and show a sustained good faith behavior throughout. And of course, when it comes to Cyprus, Turkey is supposed to sit down with Cyprus not to create any problems for the resumption of the talks between the two communities in order to reach an agreement for the solution of the Cypriot question based on the UN Security Council resolutions. And of course, Turkey should refrain from more provocations against the two EU member states and respect Greek and Cypriot sovereignty and sovereign rights. I think this is a very clear message on behalf of the EU leadership. This is EU Council, which means prime ministers and presidents of all EU countries. A very clear message that Turkey should behave, that all of us, including Greece, and I'm sure Cyprus as well, although I don't speak on behalf of Cyprus, I speak only on behalf of Greece. We want to live in peace with Turkey. We want to have an understanding and an agreement about what the issues that we have problems over. And but we want a neighbor who is reliable, a neighbor who is not creating problems, and a neighbor who doesn't militarize its foreign policy. Greece, above more than anybody else, is counting on a European partner and neighbor. But unfortunately, it's not what we want, is what we get. And what we get is something that really is getting out of control. And even within Turkey, you have a leadership and a system that is very oppressive. There is no respect for human rights, rule of law. In Greece, we receive a lot of asylum seekers from Turkey, mainly professors, university professors, educated people who are speaking about the methods of government governing of the present Turkish leadership. Which is a source for concern because the basis of our Western alliance is exactly democracy and rule of law. And we have to respect them in our own countries before we tell other countries what to do. And it's not the image of a NATO member and an EU aspiring member, a country that has no regard for basic human rights, including freedom of religion. We all have seen and we have witnessed the turning of Hagia Sophia from a museum to a mosque. Apart from respect of minorities' rights and respect of religious rights, this is a clear political statement that Turkey is not anymore a secular society, a secular country that respects the past of all the people who lived in its territories and continue to live on its territories. It turns itself into an Islamic country in the form of political Islam and a country that tries to create a different map in that part of the world. And this is a source of concern for all of us. And I want to add one more point before turning to your questions. For all of us living in that part of the world, we all understand that we cannot deal with countries like this new Turkey without the presence, the active presence of the United States. This area is of high importance, not only for us who live there, but it's also for the entire NATO alliance. This area controls the route of trade and commerce and the energy and the routes of energy supplies of Europe. And it's an area where none of us can afford to have major disturbances, a major upheaval, and nobody can have the right to dictate to anybody how to live and nobody has the right to control this region. By trying to control the region, Turkey is creating major instability, which in my view also affects direct US interests. US and the re-emergence of US as in their role as a major NATO the pillar of NATO alliance and a world power is very important if we are to create again conditions of stability and security in Eastern Mediterranean. It is very important. I try to give this message to all American leadership, being administration or Congress that I meet, because the US has a very big role to play, a very big stabilizing role to play, and we look upon American leadership to play this role. I think this is an introduction, and I'm very happy to receive your questions.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. If I'll open it up to questions, maybe if you could, for those who know how to use it, the bottom right of the participants list, you can raise your hand. And when I see a hand raised, oh, Damien Murphy knows it well. I'll call on Damien first. Damien, please go ahead. And let me also add, if those who are asking a question, could you please identify yourself and the senator you're representing or the committee? Go ahead, Damien. Maybe I need to unmute you. Let's see.
Can you hear me, Mike?
Yep, got you now.
Great, great. Well, Ambassador, thank you so much for doing this. This is a great opportunity for us at a staff level to hear directly from you and the views of the Prime Minister. Maybe if I could just ask two quick questions. One is on the recent news from Varosha and how you interpret, the announcement yesterday with respect to opening up the beach at Varosha. Whether or not that just sort of fits into the context of the elections coming up this weekend and, kind of election posturing, or is it an indication of something more sort of ominous coming down the path? So your views on Varosha would be helpful. The second question I have is on what you really see as the path forward with respect to the EU's response to Turkey. I understand that the European Council is due to meet in December to again review Turkey's behavior. What would you want to see come out of that, and how do you see kind of Brussels' posture towards Turkey now that we've gotten beyond this sort of deadlock around the Belarus sanctions and you know, the deadlock that sort of existed over the past couple of weeks?
Thank you so much. If I will start from the second point. The European Council has put sanctions on the table, but sanctions are not our goal. This is not what we seek. We seek Turkey's understanding that they should sit down and discuss, and Turkey. We seek that Turkey conforms with good neighborly relations. Is that two neighbors solve their issues and their problems with discussing, not with fighting wars. Of course, we want to give diplomacy. We wanted to give diplomacy another chance, but of course we have our concerns that maybe Turkey will say will show the right attitude, and once the European Council is over, then they will go back to their own ways. That's why the leaders decided that this issue will be discussed again in December. What we expect that the exploratory talks assume they move forward in good faith, and that things are back to normal, no warships in the Aegean, no violations of Greek sovereign rights, just a civilized relationship. If this is achieved, then there is no reason for sanctions. Sanctions is just the means, is not the end. But there we go to Varosha and what happened yesterday. You know, I'm sick and tired of all of us, and in Greece, of course, finding a lot of excuses for domestic issues, for domestic, either there are elections or this or that, and in the name of domestic priorities and domestic goals, Turkey moves forward with fait accompli and with creating problems in the relationship with Cyprus or Greece. The story of Varosha, there are Security Council resolutions about Varosha, specifically about Varosha. So what they're doing now is not only against the rights of Cyprus, is violating directly Security Council resolutions which are taken with the consent of all 15 members of the Security Council over the years, not only now, and including the 5 permanent members. So it's a direct affront to the international community, is that we don't care. And then by doing so, also they undermine any possibility, any prospect that after the elections in the Turkish Cypriot community, the two communities can resume the dialogue, the negotiations under the auspices of the Secretary General of the UN. So I don't know. I understand that they want their own candidate, the candidate that they think serves best the Turkish interests to win in the presidential elections in the Turkish Cypriot community. But I'm sorry, Turkey goes always publicly and says, we're going to defend the rights of the Turkish Cypriot community. What kind of defense of the rights of the Turkish Cypriot community is this that, number one, undermines the negotiations between the two communities, and number two, has one of the leading candidates, Mr. Akinci, going publicly and accusing Turkey for direct interference in the elections, and accusing specifically the Turkish so-called ambassador in Northern Cyprus, all this is so called because nobody recognizes Northern Cyprus. But anyway, the Turkish official representative in the north to interfere in the elections. This is Mr. Akinci who is saying all these things. So, and not only that, the government in the Turkish Cypriot community has collapsed because of this direct involvement in the of Turkey in the elections. I'm sorry, there is a Greek Cypriot community and there is a Turkish Cypriot community. And of course, Greece and Cyprus and the UK were guarantors, although the system of guarantees is so outdated for a EU member state like Cyprus that Greece, I mean, it's one of the basic demands that it's abolished. But no Greek government will ever interfere in Greek Cypriot politics, domestic politics, and the same we expect that Turkey should not do. They should allow the Turkish Cypriot community to decide who they want to be represented by. This is, you know, this is so absurd. It shows exactly that Turkey doesn't care about Turkish Cypriot interests. They care about Turkish interests in the island of Cyprus. So these are two different things, and something that has nothing to do with the question, but something that I wanted to say in my introduction and to brief you a little about it is about Mr. Pompeo's visit to Greece. Mr. Pompeo is the second time that visited Greece in a short time, and he went this time to Thessaloniki and Souda. And this was an extremely important visit because it reaffirmed the strategic relationship between Greece and the United States, and the relationship between the two countries has never been better, although this is a relationship that dates back to the beginning of the modern Greek state and the beginning of the American Federation 200 years ago, more than 200 years ago. And I always underline that these two countries, we never fought against each other for all these 200 plus years. We were always side by side in every critical moment. And this is a testament to the strength of the relationship. Of course, like every relationship, we have ups and downs, but now it's a time of so close cooperation that I cannot, the closeness of the cooperation and the relationship cannot be underestimated. So when he went to the north, the visit was mainly focused on the Western Balkans and the stabilizing role of Greece in that region. Greece is the first member of the European Union and NATO in that from the Balkan region, and since the collapse of the Yugoslavia, we were very instrumental in pushing these countries forward into their Euro-Atlantic future. So this is a role that we want to continue to play. It's in our interest, and their American and Greek interests are the same, and we work very closely with the US in promoting peace, stability, and exactly this Euro-Atlantic perspective of the region. And of course, this has also economic repercussions, especially in the energy sector. Mr. Pompeo's visit to Souda, you all know that Souda is probably one of the most important US bases outside the US. This visit and the discussions with the Prime Minister focused on the military cooperation between the two countries, the expansion of Souda Bay, which is the outcome of the upgrading of our MDCA last year, and the military cooperation also extends into military equipment and Greece buying military equipment from the US. Of course, they discussed about, the Prime Minister, Mr. Pompeo, they discussed about Cyprus, Turkey, and the Turkish actions in Eastern Mediterranean, and not only in Eastern Mediterranean, the whole destabilizing role of Turkey, as I explained it to you before. And it was a reaffirmation exactly of this very, very close relationship and the strategic partnership existing between the two countries.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, while we're waiting for the next question to come in, Madam Ambassador, maybe if you could speak a little bit to how Greece has handled COVID. Last time I checked, Greece has really shown the world how to do it right. While countries in the region, from Italy to Great Britain to France have, and if you equalize for population, if you look at number of deaths per million, while those countries I mentioned, Italy, Great Britain, France, Spain, have deaths in the high 400s or 500s, and of course in this country, 600 deaths per million. Greece is somewhere around 20 deaths per million. So if you could speak, number one, to what made Greece so successful in its battling of COVID, but then two, what's the initial sense of the economic repercussions? You had Greece coming out of a 10-year battle against its Great Depression, just emerging from that. And then you had the summer season, which, you know, is such a huge part of Greece's resources every year is generated by the tourism. So if you could speak a little bit about how Greece battled COVID and what the initial sense is for what the economic repercussions are going to be.
We were very, very successful in the first phase of COVID because the government took measures very, very early on at the time when nobody really, even in Europe, has taken this kind of measures. And number two, because the population was convinced, the Greek population, that these measures are really needed, and they implemented all these measures. So until end of June, Greece really had a very, very minimal number of deaths and a very small number of infected people. Then, of course, because of the economic realities, the economy of the country had to reopen, and especially because of tourism. And you all understand how important tourism is a sector of the Greek economy. So beginning of July, tourism opened, not in a indiscriminate way, but for Europeans and for other countries that showed very good health records, because we had to find a very fine balance between public health and economic considerations. But nevertheless, in July and August, Greece was pretty much open, and but in September, starting September, the numbers started climbing as a result of August and July and August, but still the numbers are under control. Mainly we have more incidents in the bigger Athens area. Part of it is because there we have a big number of undocumented immigrants, but we're trying to help the situation. And because the main reason is because half of Greece live in the greater Athens area. Most of the cases we have are concentrated also on old, people for older people, houses that provide care for older people. It's the same story all over Europe, but still the situation is under control, although the government is taking more and more measures, like restaurants are not open after midnight, bars are not open after midnight, and in certain very limited areas, if they have a higher than acceptable number, then they take some more drastic measures. I don't think in Europe a complete lockdown is now in the plans of any government, and still the situation is not as severe to justify a complete lockdown, but some specific measures are in place already, and hopefully the situation is going to stay under control. Of course, the economic repercussions for Greece are severe. Greece had just emerged from a 10-year severe economic crisis. We were just in the beginning of getting better and getting to having healthy economic indicators. And then we were struck by the COVID virus. But this is not a Greek problem, it's an international problem. We're very happy that the European Union back in July managed to agree on a big package of relief and economic measures to help the countries mostly affected, to help all countries of the European Union affected by the virus, which translates into a very, very, very good package, economic package for Greece. And at the same time, and Greece was affected also because tourism, no matter how we tried to do something in July and August, still it was not what it used to be. And this is a main source for income for Greece. Anyway, based on the economic package coming from the European Union and on some sound economic management, we hope that we will get over it. Of course, in 2020 will be a very hard year economically, but 2021, we hope to see some positive signs. And as an indicator of faith into a Greek economy, I have to tell you that just last week, Microsoft announced a huge investment in Greece for cloud station. You know, I'm not very good expert in this kind of technology, but it's one of the biggest Microsoft investments in this, and it's a sign of faith in trust in the Greek economy.
Next question, Kate Sadler. Go ahead, Kate.
Hi, Madam Ambassador. Nice to see you. I work for Chairman Jim Risch, and we met a couple of weeks ago, in fact. I would love your perspective on, or Greece's perspective on, the deconfliction mechanism that NATO and Secretary Stoltenberg has proposed or is in process. Kind of what's the role of NATO in the Greece-Turkey dispute? I know Stoltenberg traveled to Turkey recently, and I would just love your perspective, or Greece's perspective, excuse me, on NATO's role in this, the tension between two NATO allies. Thank you.
You know, NATO is not happy having two allies getting on the brink of war, but you know, NATO has some restrictions in what they can do, because every decision needs to be taken by all members of NATO, unanimity. So if Turkey is part of this unanimity, then how much you can decide. And we know how limited an influence NATO had on the problem between France and Turkey. 2-3 months ago, I think it was in June, when a Turkish warship threatened a French naval ship, you know, warship off the coast of Libya. And France took the whole issue into NATO, and still NATO didn't manage to come up with a full report because of Turkey's veto. So you understand, it's not only, this is not only Greek-Turkish issue, it's much bigger, and NATO has to deal with it. The deconfliction mechanism, it's useful, of course, but for me, I'm amazed that two NATO members need the deconfliction mechanism. Deconfliction mechanism means that you don't have an accident. You know, practically, you don't hit each other by accident. It's in an Eastern Mediterranean and Aegean. And I wonder why we should need that. Why we should need to have our naval forces facing each other in the middle of the Aegean or in Eastern Mediterranean. Okay, in the absence of this, of an answer to this question, yes, it's a good thing. Mr. Stoltenberg, and it's we have agreed on that. Mr. Stoltenberg was in Ankara, and then he went to Athens. But NATO cannot play a mediation role, as I said. They try to give Turkey some messages, but everybody's trying to give Turkey some messages, not only Mr. Stoltenberg, the European Union. Mr. Borrell has traveled many times. The US is giving them messages, even public messages. Mr. Pompeo gave public messages, and State Department sometimes. But Mr. Pompeo was very, very explicit in his messages. The problem is that I don't think the messages are taken. That's the big thing, that the messages are given, but they're not taken. So we have to see what to do about that.
sorry, you mentioned, Madam Ambassador, the refugee issue briefly. If you could focus a little bit more on that, particularly because of how COVID hit the world, and as Greece is battling COVID, it also had to battle Turkey's weaponization of migrants. If you could speak a little bit more about that incident, how things have developed since then, and what the future looks like.
The refugee, we have to say that now we don't have a refugee crisis, we have an immigration crisis between Greece and Turkey, between Europe and Turkey, it's not Greece and Turkey. Back in 2015, it was a real refugee crisis. It was at the height of the Syrian war, and so many people had to leave the war zones. And in that time, most of these people went through Greece all the way to Germany. Right now, we don't have refugees because the border between Syria and Turkey is closed by the Turkish army, and the refugees that are staying in Turkey, after all these years, they have a life there. And now we have mainly immigrants, illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants who want to leave Turkey and come to Europe, not necessarily to Greece, for a better life. Back in late February, we had a major crisis in the Greek-Turkish land border when undocumented immigrants were pushed by the Turkish authorities. The Turkish authorities even transported them to the border with being enticed by the prospect of crossing into Greece and then going all the way. Usually the countries they want to go is Germany, the Netherlands, and Sweden. But this was a massive movement helped by the Turkish authorities, and movement that turned violent against the Greek border guards who were hit with stones, rocks, iron, whatever. Of course, you cannot enter another country like this. The Greek border police and with the help of European border police Frontex managed to contain this. And this, it was also a political move on the part of Turkey, using immigrants, using poor people, unfortunate people who go for a search of better life in order to achieve political goals, which is to blackmail the European Union. At that time, at the height of that crisis, the leadership of the European Union came and visited the Greek-Turkish land border. And apart from the European border police Frontex, some individual member states like Austria or Cyprus sent their own border police to assist the Greek border police. This having failed, of course, Greece has the right and the obligation to control the movement in its borders, and as a member of Schengen also space, and we're doing that like that. But there are a lot of issues. We don't underestimate the fact that Turkey is home to a lot of refugees and a lot of immigrants. I'm sorry, part of the number of immigrants they have is the fact that the Turkish authorities, the Turkish authorities do not take any measure to stop illegal immigration into their own country. Taking a flight and a ticket of Turkish Airlines from countries in sub-Saharan Africa, or it's a sure way to land in Istanbul, and then you're free to go. So one of the reasons that the negotiations between the EU and Turkey on visa liberalization have stalled is exactly the fact that Turkey doesn't take any measures to control illegal immigration into Turkey. And all these people go to Turkey not because they necessarily want to stay there, but because they think this is the easiest way to go to the European Union countries. By pushing and using immigration, weaponizing immigration just to achieve political goals is something completely unacceptable. And part of the discussions and that we have as European Union, because immigration is an issue of the EU-Turkish relations, is exactly excuse me, to find ways to help Turkey. Already the European Union is giving Turkey a lot of money in order to host and provide basic services to the number of refugees that they live on Turkish soil. But part of the discussion is how Turkey has to do its own job to protect its own borders and not export immigrants and refugees to Europe in order to serve political goals. This is a very important issue, and this is much bigger than Greek-Turkish relationship. This is EU-Turkish relationship.
Well, don't see any other questions right now. Any final questions for the ambassador? If not, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It was nice to have this opportunity to introduce you to Ambassador Papadopoulou. She hopes to meet many of your senators sometime soon when things hopefully allow for it relatively soon. It's great to have over a third of the US Senate represented on this call today, and we'll be sending a recording of this call to those your colleagues who couldn't join us today. So Madam Ambassador, thank you again. Great to have you all with us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for attending it. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Be safe.